NAV loans, also referred to as NAV facilities, are becoming very popular in private equity. In this video, we will tell you everything you need to know about NAV loans. We'll divide the video up into two sections. We'll start by explaining what are NAV loans, then we will go into detail on the motivations for NAV loans by private equity funds. And we will end the video with a final thought that answers the question, should private credit be in your portfolio? And if so, what should your allocation be? So what are NAV loans? Well, just to recap, a private equity fund is created by a limited partnership agreement between the limited partners, the LPs or the investors, and the general partner, the GP or the private equity firm. Now, the private equity fund will buy companies on the investor's behalf. So let's look at how loans are involved. Well, in buyout funds, it is common that the private equity fund will borrow money at the individual portfolio company level. In other words, when a private equity fund buys a company, it usually obtains a direct loan that is backed by the cash flow or assets of the individual company. This is usually referred to as a leveraged buyout. Direct loans used to be primarily given by banks, but since the financial crisis and Dodd-Frank, many of these loans come from private credit funds. Now, as promised, let's explain NAV loans in private equity. Well, instead of borrowing against one portfolio company, the private equity fund will borrow against the NAV or the net asset value of the group of portfolio companies. In other words, the private equity fund is borrowing against a diverse set of companies instead of one specific company. Since there is less risk to lend against a group of companies compared to just one company, the cost of borrowing will be less for the private equity fund. Now, let me clarify that NAV loans are not replacing direct loans, but they coexist in the same fund, with direct loans occurring first when the company is purchased, and NAV loans coming after, usually when there are multiple portfolio companies in the fund. Another point to clarify is that NAV loans are different than subscription lines of credit, where NAV loans occur later in the fund's life and have the recourse of the portfolio companies, whereas subscription lines of credit are used to extend the time for capital calls and have the recourse of the investor commitments. For more on subscription lines of credit, please check out our video titled Subscription Lines of Credit. Now let's look at the motivations for NAV loans by private equity funds. The two main motivations by private equity funds to obtain NAV loans are more capital and quicker distributions. In terms of having more capital, NAV loans help private equity funds gain capital for follow-on investments, new deals, and will allow private equity funds to hold on to portfolio companies longer. As we mentioned in our video titled Side Effects of Regulation, regulations usually lead to side effects. Sarbanes-Oxley led to more companies staying private and fueled the private equity industry. Dodd-Frank led to more restrictions on bank lending and fueled the private debt industry. Well, the new SEC regulations on private equity that were introduced on August 23, 2023, are trying to reduce the conflicts of interest in GP-led secondaries. GP-led secondaries, which we have covered in multiple videos, are when a GP leads a sale of a company or companies in a secondary transaction as a way to hold portfolio companies longer. Well, with increased regulation on GP-led secondaries, I believe that NAV loans may be used as a substitute to GP-led secondaries. In terms of quicker distributions, well, sometimes private equity funds will obtain NAV loans to give distributions back to investors earlier, which will increase both IRR, internal rate of return, and DPI, distributed to paid-in capital. The increase of IRR and DPI will help the private equity firm raise future funds and, in some cases, collect higher performance fees. We talk about how private equity funds inflate IRR, as well as give investors advice on what questions to ask private equity funds in a due diligence process, especially about IRR, in our video titled, IRR is the worst form of private equity performance measurement, except for all the others that have been used. So check out that video to learn more. Now, here's a final thought. Investors around the world are asking about private credit. After all, interest rates are high, private credit funds are giving out more loans than ever, and there are many options to give out these loans, such as through direct loans, mezzanine loans, distress loans, and specialty loans such as NAV financing. Investors. There are quite a few firms offering NAV loans, such as Apollo, Ares, and 17 Capital. And there are many firms offering various types of private credit funds. I guess the question is, should private credit be in your portfolio? And if so, what should your allocation be? Well, according to Goldman Sachs' 2023 Family Office Survey, the average allocation to private credit in 2023 by family offices was 3%, in contrast with a 26% allocation to private equity. Well, I believe this gap is going to decrease because of the higher interest rate environment, which I believe will increase the demand for private credit and decrease the demand for private equity. But this doesn't answer the question if you should have allocation to private credit. If you've been watching our videos for a while, you probably know what my answer will be. I believe that your allocation to any asset class depends on your individual situation. More specifically, it depends on your liquidity needs, time horizon, tax considerations, legal situation, and unique circumstances, and how these constraints determine the target return and level of risk for your portfolio. And once you have your portfolio objective, then you should see how private credit fits into your entire portfolio. And if it does, well, then that answers your question.